1 week season.
What is going on, OWS fam, YouTube fam, podcast fam, everybody listening to this? Welcome to the week 8 edition of the OWS Angles podcast. I am your host. I am your guest. I am JMToWin. As always, throw this baby on 1.5x speed or 2x speed. And let's get started with one of the stranger slates that I can remember. So, start of the season. Let's talk about the start of the season. So at the start of the season, I was, through the first 7 weeks really, I have basically been building rosters by just playing my favorite plays and then taking the tenets of proper roster construction and building good rosters with my favorite plays. And so basically the start of the season has been a blend of knowing ball and knowing proper roster construction. And so we've talked over the years about how oftentimes the best DFS players in any sport, oftentimes the best DFS players don't know ball. Oftentimes the best DFS players just understand the math and mechanics of daily fantasy sports, the strategy, the theory of daily fantasy sports, and understand how to take projections and ownership projections and the math of how you maximize your chances of a first place finish and how you get more things right when you get something right and all that. And they build better rosters than the field and they win in that way. And typically the people who know ball really well are much worse DFS players because they overrate their ball knowledge. So I'm kind of a unique blend of player in the middle of that where generally speaking, I put my ball knowledge up there with anybody, and it's not necessarily the same ball knowledge that other people have, but in terms of my understanding of these teams and how they interact and how these coaches are trying to win their games and how that relates to DFS. And I take that ball knowledge though, and we focus at OWS very much on how you play DFS and what this game of DFS actually is, the strategy and theory and roster construction, and then being able to not overrate my ball knowledge, but being able to put just enough credence in it to say, no, I'm confident that these are the best plays on the slate, and then I'll build better rosters than the field is building with those plays. And so it's been a good season so far, right? I had week 3, I had a roster that was live for first place in the double spy. Week 4, I finished second in the $555 three max, the face mask contest, finished second place in that. Last week, I finished 6th place in the face mask and the roster that finished 6th place. I spent Saturday night kind of back and forth on whether or not I was going to use that in the $1,500 single entry, the game changer. Didn't use it. I used my other favorite face mask roster in the game changer, which finished out of the money, but the one that finished 6th in the face mask would have taken down the game changer for first place for 100K. So far it's been a very good season for me, both in terms of ROI and potential ROI, just from saying, I know ball pretty well. I know how to build good rosters, and that's how I'm going to attack most slates. This slate looks very different to me. This slate is a slate where theory comes a lot more heavily into play and where ball knowledge goes out of the window to some extent. And so to put this slate more deeply into context, just in terms of at least how I'm seeing it, right? So I'm not a major bettor, but I have been betting spreads and over-unders since week 5 of this year. So really quickly, I want to clarify, just because I've known people who have had problems with gambling, with sports betting, I want to clarify that generally speaking, we should assume that we don't have an edge over the sports books. Generally speaking, we should assume that we should only be betting money that we feel comfortable losing. So with my units, basically comparing it to my weekly DFS allocation, I could be negative 20 units, and it would be the equivalent of one bad DFS weekend, right? And so I've sort of structured my betting in that way. And mostly I've just been betting in order to say, hey, I feel like I actually have a pretty good ball knowledge, a pretty good handle on this season so far. And so why not put that into play? So I've been betting since week 5 and just picking spots where I have high confidence in placing bets there, leaving the rest of the games and spots alone, dropping these bets into my journal in Discord, and then tracking the results of these bets. Through these 3 weeks, weeks 5 through 7, I'm up over 14 units just in this 3-week span of time. We were up almost 10 units in week 7 alone. And so basically, I say that to say, there's been a high level of confidence on my end in terms of, okay, I see this game well, I'll place bets on these, and then things playing out that way. Now, obviously, there's variance involved and all that. We've run hot, but what I'm getting at is this particular week, I have only 4 bets out there on this particular week, and 2 of them I put in last night, Thursday night. one of them was on an over and one of them was on an under. So it wasn't even expressing confidence in the matchups and how I expect the matchups to play out. And so I've gotten a lot of my edge in this betting by getting into the DraftKings app a week early. And so this week, early in week 8, putting down some bets for week 9 and seeing things before those line movements start to happen and understanding who these teams are and how these teams interact and taking on some of that risk of, there could be some injuries this week that shift things, but generally speaking, getting out ahead of things. And so ever since week 7, I've been looking at this slate and being like, I don't have a feel for this one in terms of these matchups and how these games are like this to play out. And that has persisted throughout this week. I opened the app, the DraftKings app, 2 or 3 times a day to just look through all the games, just like, is anything standing out to me? And it's continued that nothing has been standing out to me. So I say all that just to say that's sort of the state of this week. And we use this podcast, generally speaking, we try to not be redundant in what we're looking at. So I've got my podcast with Pete Overzet on Friday morning. Then I record this podcast and I have my podcast Solo Ship with Squirrel Patrol. You can find this show with Pete on the Pete Overzet channel on YouTube. You can find this show and the other one, the Solo Ship, on the One Week Season podcast feed. You can also find Solo Ship on the 4for4 podcast feed, YouTube feed. I record these 3 podcasts and I write my player grid, which is my player pool that goes into the scroll. And I try to make sure that I'm not hitting the same things in this podcast that I'm hitting in the player grid, hitting in the show with Pete, hitting in the Solo Ship show. I did see a comment last week that was something to the effect of, I've spent the last 2 hours listening to 3 JM podcasts where he's saying the same thing in all 3 of them. And that did make me think maybe the Angles podcast has run its course. Maybe next year this is not something that we do because, again, the stretch I'm trying to take here is like, how do we hit on things that I'm not hitting on in these other podcasts? And obviously there's people who've been listening to this podcast for years. You keep coming back to it because it's part of your routine and your schedule. And so I don't want to take that away from you. But then also make sure that it's not just redundant, that we're hitting the same things over and over again. But on a week like this, we will talk about some of the things that we have been hitting on in other podcasts. And so apologies for that. But what I do want to do in this podcast that is going to be unique is I'm going to go through the games and actually talk about why I'm seeing each game through a lens of, I don't feel a lot of confidence here, right? This game has a broad range of outcomes. This game has a broad range of outcomes in the way the game could play out. It has a broad range of outcomes in the way that the scoring production, the fantasy production could shake out. And so we're going to go game by game. We're going to go through in order in the DraftKings app. There's one game I'm going to skip over in all of this. And we're going to talk through these other 9 games and just sort of high level what I'm seeing in these games and why these games are looking to me like games where it's like, there's just not a lot of confidence on this week. And why, because of that, this is a slate where there's a little bit more theory involved. And I got kind of off on that tangent there because I was going to mention that in the journal earlier in this week, I was talking about how I'm seeing this week and how this is a week where it starts to become a thing of maybe don't overrate my ball knowledge, but take a lot of my ball knowledge out of the equation and just say, okay, this is a theory and strategy type of slate. So there are certain DFS players, I even said this earlier in the week in the journal, that if you're an OWS subscriber and let's say that your typical blend, just as an example, your typical blend is you put 40% stock in whatever you yourself are thinking on the slate. And then you balance out with 30% stock in what I'm saying and 30% stock in what other OWS contributors are saying. I would say on this week, lower the stock that you're putting in what I'm saying, raise the stock you're putting in what others are saying. For example, Zanimir isn't even a no ball guy. That's not his edge in DFS. He's one of those guys that the reason he's so good at DFS is by not overrating ball knowledge and instead just understanding how to take the projections, the ownership projections, the industry talk, the sentiment that he's picking up from people and how confident people are, how overconfident people are in certain things, how overlooked certain things are, and understanding that strategy and theory behind everything and putting it together into winning rosters. Mike is always good at finding angles on a slate like this, and I might have found some myself as well, where it's like, okay, here's the way to blend knowing ball with just like a better way to play the slate than other people. And then obviously Hilo's whole thing, where he's taken game theory courses at Harvard, at Yale, at Stanford, at Northwestern. Hilo's whole thing is like, game theory strategy sites like this are great for him. And so lean into those guys as well this week. And that doesn't even mention Pappy and Larejo and Sonic and everybody else, StatATL, who's providing awesome stuff on the site. But yeah, it's a unique week to where for me, it's like, I have to kind of step back from ball knowledge. I have to recognize that ball knowledge slates are going to be my highest ROI slates over time because I feel like I have a greater edge than the field in that category, while also not overrating my ability to predict what will happen on a micro level, and instead taking that ball knowledge and saying, okay, how do I build good DFS rosters around that? So a slate like this is going to be lower expected value for me over time. Doesn't mean that I'm going to lose money on a slate like this over time, but it does mean I'm going to lose money on a slate like this more often than I would on the slates that we've had through really the first 7 weeks of the season this year. So looking through these games, I'm going to start with the Giants and the Eagles. Talk about a broad range of outcomes, right? Like Jackson Dart, he completed 15 of 33 passes last week. And yet, the Giants put up all these points and Jackson Dart put up this big fantasy game. The Giants just beat the Eagles a couple weeks ago. The Eagles are 7.5-point favorites in this one. Let's look at the Eagles, right? Oh, the Eagles offense got back on track last week. Did it? Did it really? Or did these high variance downfield throws just happen to connect last week, where several other weeks they haven't connected? Nothing really changed with the Eagles offense. They went several drives where they couldn't move the ball at all. I think it was like 4 or 5 drives where they picked up 7 yards or something like that. It was like, the Eagles basically were playing the same offense they've been playing. They just happened to hit some of these downfield throws that they've missed on some other weeks. And so Jalen Hurts has a perfect passer rating and all things are fixed in this offense, had this big game, but it's like really nothing changed. They just happened to connect on some of these downfield throws. So that could happen again. Also, we could go back to them missing some of these downfield throws and we end up with this game where literally anything from the Giants winning this game, which we've already seen once, to the Eagles stomping the Giants is completely within the realm of outcomes here. And what do we know in this spot? Well, actually, we'll get back to what we know as we kind of cycle back to things at the end. But yeah, so we know that there's all the things that we don't know in this spot, right? Is how this game's going to play out. Is this game going to be close and competitive? Are the Giants going to win? Are the Eagles going to win? How are the Eagles going to succeed on offense? Are they going to actually get back on track and in rhythm? Or is it going to be more of the same where it's like, hopefully we hit some of these big plays. Hopefully enough of these big plays break our way that our offense looks good, but it's not actually good yet. And so lots of question marks there. Then we have Miami at Atlanta. So we have this really fast Atlanta defense that I wasn't giving enough credit to after they played J.J. McCarthy and the Vikings, just because J.J. McCarthy looked so obviously slow to process things. And it was like, oh, this is the best pressure rate the Falcons defense has had in whatever it was in decades, whatever the stats were from that game. And oh man, look how great this Falcons defense is. And I was like, okay, but like J.J. McCarthy looks horrible right here, right? But the Falcons have continued to perform well on defense. Obviously, they've been inconsistent. They had that game against the Panthers where they lost 30-0, but generally speaking, the Panthers have been very good on defense. They're very fast on defense, which matches up well with this Miami offense. This Miami offense, now we have no Darren Waller. We know, like last year, was it Tyreek Hill topped, I think it was like 14.3 DraftKings points like 3 times all season. And now Jalen Waddle's operating in the lead role without Tyreek Hill to take away attention. So like, yeah, he's had a good game in this role so far, but also how frequently do we think we're going to see that? Again, no Darren Waller. And so it's down to just Acham and Jalen Waddle on kind of a broken offense against a good, fast defense. The Falcons are 7.5-point favorites here, so they're expected to control this game and potentially run away with this game. Well, it's a great matchup for the Falcons passing attack, but we've got the injury with Michael Penix. He's questionable as of, this recording. Looks like he's probably going to play, but, maybe hobbled a little bit. This is one of the run-heaviest teams in football, playing a defense that everybody runs against, so we expect them to run the ball. We expect them to have success running the ball. But then how much of that flows through Bijan? How much do they take the workload off of Bijan a little bit as we get deeper into this game? And Algiers taking some of the work away. We have a week where there's potentially going to be a lot of higher scores coming from the running back position. So going to Algier and being like, hey, it's kind of sneaky. Maybe he gets 15, 18, 20 points. That probably doesn't end up helping us all that much on this particular week, but maybe Bijan gets his 22 to 25 to 27 instead of his 35 to 40 that he's capable of in this matchup. And so really lots up in the air in this particular game. Next, we'll look at Buffalo and Carolina. So how good are the Bills really? That's an open question. We know that the Bills are not very good on defense. We know that the Bills have trouble stopping the run. We know that the Bills are fine stopping the pass because of the creative pass game concepts that Sean McDermott and Bobby Babich have up their sleeves. But if they have to sell out to stop the run, then that takes away what they can do to stop the pass. So teams that can run and pass tend to do a good job against the Bills. Can the Panthers run and pass? We don't know for sure. Andy Dalton's going to be under center, but we can expect that the Panthers should be able to pass the ball pretty well here. We can expect that the Bills will sell out to stop the run here because that's how the Panthers are initially going to try to win this game. And so we have an opportunity for the Panthers to do well here, but also for the Panthers to do poorly here. There's a broad range of outcomes in this one. Also, if the Panthers are doing well, it could just be coming on the ground, but in what's now a split backfield to where maybe we're getting no fantasy production from that. Or it could be that the run's getting stopped and they're doing well through the air, and then we're able to get some value from Tetero and McMillan or from Jatavian Sanders or maybe from Jalen Coker, but a lot of question marks here. And then we know that the Bills are not going to unleash Josh Allen unless they have to. So most scenarios in this game have Josh Allen not putting up a tournament winner. But what if the Panthers do well on offense here? What if the Panthers push the Bills here? Well, obviously the Panthers are much better defense this year than they were last year, but we're not scared about that with Josh Allen if he is forced to be unleashed. And so we would expect that the Bills would be able to put up a big game here, and Josh Allen becomes this dark horse to put up one of the top fantasy scores on the slate. But again, in order for that to happen, you need the Panthers to be scoring points. You got to build those rosters the right way, and that's pretty low likelihood. And so again, a lot of question marks in this game. Then we have the Jets at the Bengals. This game is such a broad range of outcomes that the Jets, who are not a great defense and are not going to have the Bengals, who are a bad defense, the Bengals are expected to be one of the more popular defense special teams plays on the slate. I don't quite get that because it looks like it'll be Tyrod Taylor and not Justin Fields. And Tyrod Taylor is not going to just make a ton of mistakes and gift a bunch of points to an opposing defense, especially an opposing defense that doesn't have a pass rush. Tyrod Taylor's a much better passer than Justin Fields. This offense should look a lot more competent with Tyrod Taylor under center. Again, assuming it's Tyrod Taylor under center, talking about question marks, the Jets think there's a competitive advantage here. They're not letting the word get out. From what Woody Johnson has said, it seems like, if he has his way, Justin Fields is not going to be starting. And it seems like Tyrod Taylor is probably healthy enough that he is going to be starting, but we might not know until Sunday, or at least a Schefter bomb on Saturday night. And then what does it mean for Tyrod Taylor to be a better passer? If there's no Garrett Wilson, and then your wide receivers are Allen Lazard and Josh Reynolds and Arian Smith, who knows, right? So we're going to have Tyrod Taylor trying to move the offense through Mason Taylor, through these wide receivers. We also have the question marks around Breece Hall, where Breece Hall has been active on social media, implying that he wants to get out of the Jets. Teams have been calling the Jets, asking about trading for Breece Hall. Last week, Breece Hall, I was kind of concerned last week, hey, maybe they limit his snaps, maybe they limit his touches because he is on the trade block. Well, they ended up putting him out there in his normal role at the start of the game, but then he hurts his knee and kind of plays sparingly the rest of the game there. This week, he's questionable. Well, there's question marks here, right? So yes, it's a good spot for Breece Hall, but does he have his normal role? Or is Isaiah Davis going to start eating into that role a little bit? So again, question marks there. And then on the Bengals side, it's like, Joe Flacco looked great last week. No Sauce Gardner for the Jets, so that really opens things up for Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. But also the Jets are going to have a plan in place. They're going to say there's no way we're letting Jamar Chase get 23 targets this week. At least that's going to be their goal coming into this game. Steve Wilks, Aaron Glenn are going to be drawing up something to say, hey, let's force them to throw away from Jamar Chase. Can T. Higgins then have the big game, or is it just sort of this middling game? We're putting a lot of faith in Joe Flacco after a couple of good games here, and so yeah, very broad range of outcomes here. So obviously can play to the upside. It can play to a game where the Bengals are smashing the Jets. It could play to a game where the Bengals are putting up a lot of points against the Jets and the Jets are keeping it competitive through Breece Hall, through Tyrod Taylor. But also could be a low-scoring game for a Jets defense. Again, no Sauce Gardner, that makes a big difference. But a Jets defense that has clearly and obviously been improving the last few weeks and has looked much better on the field. And, again, playing against Joe Flacco, a beat-up offensive line for the Bengals, or a not very good offensive line for the Bengals. And so, lots of question marks in that one. Then we have San Francisco at Houston. We have one of the best defenses in the NFL in Houston. We have San Francisco, who is, I said in my journal this week, they're being held together by duct tape and Salah magic on defense. And, we've seen C.J. Stroud against the Ravens, against Tennessee. He's been able to look good. Like, he still looks like C.J. Stroud when things are there. It's a bad offense. It's a poorly schemed offense. It's a poorly called offense. There's no rhythm to it. There's no understanding of how to attack a defense. But if you can just let Stroud drop back, pick apart a defense a little bit, and not get, under pressure immediately by the opposing defense, which could be the case here against 49ers team that does not have a great pass rush minus Nick Bosa, we could end up seeing C.J. Stroud playing well here, right? And then what does that mean? Do the 49ers find a way to respond against Houston? Not going to be a high-scoring game, but maybe it's a competent game from the Texans where some interesting things emerge. Maybe it's one of the lowest-scoring games on the weeks, or even the lowest-scoring game of the week, so very broad range of outcomes there. Then we have Cleveland and New England, where Cleveland wants to run the ball and then build their passing attack off of that. You really can't run against New England, so there's that. New England has been tremendous on offense, but we know how great the Browns are on defense. So then there's this question of, what does this look like here, right? Like, are the Patriots getting slowed down here? Is this kind of a close, low-scoring game? Is this a game where the Patriots say, hey, look, as long as we don't make mistakes on offense, we will pull away in this game? And they kind of call a conservative, ball out quick, run the ball game plan early on. Low-scoring game where gradually they pull away, the Browns make mistakes, the Patriots kind of win a control type of game. Or is this a game where, against an aggressive Browns defense, the Patriots are hitting some big plays, man coverage, aggressive defense, and all of a sudden the Patriots are racking up points? It's a game like Maybe it's a game like Baltimore had against Cleveland earlier this year, where Baltimore didn't have a lot of yards on offense, but because of all the turnovers and mistakes from the Browns defense, the short fields for Baltimore's offense, they ended up putting up big fantasy scores because they were working with short field, scoring a bunch of touchdowns, won that game 41-17. So talk about broad range of outcomes here, a really broad range of outcomes in this one. Tampa at New Orleans, Baker Mayfield are working without Mike Evans, without Chris Godwin. I'm not totally sure that Emeka Egbuka is 100% healthy. Maybe he is. Without Bucky Irving, against the Saints team that, again, has been difficult for teams to deal with throughout this season. They beat the Giants. They gave the Patriots a tough game at home. They gave the 49ers a tough game at home. They gave the Cardinals a tough game at home. And they're playing at home here against this really beat-up Buccaneers team. It's easy to look at this and be like, the Saints are 1-6. The narrative around the Saints is like, oh, Rattler's awful. He threw these picks last week and had the fumble last week. But like the truth is that, as I've said, Rattler has played himself into a very long career as an NFL backup. He's probably not going to be a starter somewhere next year. I think that the Saints will move on for him, but he has at least created a conversation here where he's been very competent. The Buccaneers are only 4.5-point favorites in this game. It's not like Vegas is expecting a blowout win here. So there's a lot of things that can happen here. It could be that it's a close competitive game with the Bucs scoring points, and the Saints offense actually emerging with a really good game here as well. It could be kind of this middling, like 24-21 type game. It could be a lower scoring game. Probably don't get the Bucs under 20 points even with all the injuries, but again, it could be like a 21-17 type game, or 21-14, 24-14. So a lot of different ways that this game could play out, because there's also within the range of outcomes like a 34-27 type of game that could play out here in this one. Dallas at Denver. Obviously, we've been attacking games with Dallas all season because of how bad their defense has been. We've been avoiding games with the games against the Denver defense. The Cowboys offense is so good that you can consider it against the Denver defense. That's how good they've been this year. Then, of course, you got the Broncos offense that we were riding last week with Bo Nix. That unfortunately didn't have my main Bo Nix roster in the Game Changer, but he was my second highest exposure quarterback, stacking up that game, betting on the upside of this offense. Now they're playing the Cowboys. That's exciting, right? But the problem with Bo Nix is it's not that teams are stopping the Broncos. The Broncos are stopping themselves. There are so many missed throws. There are so many poor reads. There are so many mistakes from this offense that you can easily see a way in which this zone-heavy Cowboys defense that, again, is going to continue to improve. They can't be as bad as they've been under Matt Eberflus, who's a good defensive coach, who's going to get this communication figured out. He's going to get things fixed on the back end to where eventually teams are forced to march the field against the Cowboys. Maybe they're not under pressure a lot, but they're having to at least throw underneath and march the field. Like, there's a chance that this is a game where the Cowboys are continuing to improve on defense, where they're forcing the Broncos to march the field, and the Broncos are just incapable of that. Again, the Broncos had no points. What was it? I think heading into the fourth quarter last week, it was 0 points heading into the fourth quarter, scored 33 points in the fourth quarter. So it's completely within the range of outcomes. This game is a complete dud as well. And then we've got Tennessee at Indianapolis, where we know that Tennessee looked bad last week, but they still have a ways to go. They're going to be missing Calvin Ridley this week. And so can they put something together against this Indianapolis secondary? Yeah, I mean, maybe we start seeing signs of life. I don't think that we're actually going to Tennessee here. Maybe in the Millie Maker, we get to a point where we're starting to build some Tennessee stacks, but not on tighter builds, not on single entry 3 max. And then you go over to the Colts side, and it's like, well, if the Colts control this game, right? Daniel Jones is, I think it's 5 weeks in a row without going for even 4x his week 8 salary. And so, what are the chances that the Colts are pushed in such a way that they're having to put up tournament winners? Tyler Warren hasn't cracked 20 DraftKings points yet this year. He's now priced up at 5,500. Michael Pittman hasn't topped 21 DraftKings points yet this year, right? This offense spreads the ball around. Jonathan Taylor soaks up a lot of the touchdowns. They're probably not being pushed in this game environment, so it's hard to see the tournament winners emerging from this side. So that's 9 of the 10 games on this slate. And that kind of gives you a sense of all the question marks that we have on this slate. So what's the game that I skipped over? So the game that I skipped over is Baltimore and the Bears. So let's take a quick look at that game. So the Bears, obviously Caleb Williams still has not figured out. Again, I'll keep citing this. I've been saying I think we're going to be paying $7,500 for Caleb Williams at some point next year. Could happen this year. I don't think it will. But as he gets used to this Ben Johnson offense and the timing and rhythm of it and learns to play within structure in this offense and then just add a dash of the special stuff that he can do outside of structure, as opposed to failing to play within structure and then constantly having to try to do things outside of structure. Once we get to that point, Caleb Williams in this offense is going to absolutely pop. But since the Bears came out of the bye, they've been running the ball more. They've been hiding Caleb Williams more. They've been splitting the backfield between DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monungai. So another one of these where it's like, yeah, it's great, but can we really capture the upside that's coming from this team if they end up doing well on the ground here? But what we do know is with Ben Johnson scheming things up, with him calling the plays, the Bears have scored 24 plus in 5 out of 6 games. In all 3 games that Lamar Jackson played start to finish, the Ravens scored 30 plus, and that includes games against the Browns and the Lions, who are really good defenses. And then the Ravens have allowed 37 plus in 4 out of 6 games. The over-under in this game is 49.5, and it probably should be higher. So in terms of where we have high confidence, we should have pretty high confidence, especially, yes, Lamar Jackson's coming back from injury, and that creates some question marks and all that. But in terms of like the context of this slate, where do we have the highest confidence? The highest confidence should be that the Ravens score points here and that the Bears find a way to keep this game competitive throughout, right? And so that's one of the spots where we should have high confidence. It's the only game that I can look at and say, I'm pretty confident in how this game plays out. Now, obviously, weird things can happen. The game can play out differently. But again, talking about like where I'm expressing confidence, that's one of the 4 places where I've placed a bet this week, and that is the Ravens and Bears over that 49.5 mark. In fact, do I have any spreads bet this week? I've got an over, I've got an under, I've got a 3-leg parlay of 3 of these heavy favorites winning, the Bills, the Colts, and another team winning their games. And so, yeah, like there's not a lot of confidence for me in like this game will play out this way. This matchup will play out this way this week. This is one of the games where it's like, well, I do see this game playing out in such a way that the scoring is there. Doesn't mean I'm going to be right, but it's a spot where I feel comfortable expressing confidence. Where else can we express confidence on this slate? Well, going through the slate again and just thinking about where we can express confidence, I think we can express confidence in the Falcons doing well on offense. So we've already talked about questions on what that means for fantasy points or fantasy points at cost for our DFS rosters. But just in terms of, let's just take the slate and say, where do we have confidence? For me, it's confidence that the Ravens score points and the Bears score points with them. Confidence that the Falcons do well on offense. Confidence that the Bengals pass the ball a lot because they're not good at running. And this past game with Joe Flacco has become kind of an extension of the run game. Again, questions on what that means for production and whatnot in the spot at cost, but confidence on the Ravens scoring points, the Bears keeping up with them, confidence on the Falcons doing well on offense, confidence in the Bengals passing the ball a lot, confidence in the Eagles doing well on offense. And that's kind of an iffy one because, again, it has been inconsistent. They have not been putting together drives, and that's typically how, like, that's the lens through which I'm looking at things, is who is able to put together drives, who is able to stay on schedule, who's able to keep their offense in rhythm, who's able to keep a defense off balance. The Eagles don't check any of those boxes, but the Eagles are able to hit enough big plays that they're pretty regularly able to put up the points. And against the Giants defense, I feel confident that they can do that. Again, questions on what that means for fantasy points. And then the last spot is confidence in the Colts scoring points. So again, questions on what that means for fantasy points here as well. But those are the spots where I feel confident expressing some level of confidence on this slate. And then the Ravens and Bears one is the only one where it really points us toward fantasy production. And even with that, there's a lot of question marks on how do you play Lamar Jackson. And we'll get to that deeper into this podcast. We'll get to it in the player grid as well. And unfortunately, that's something that we'll probably touch on in each podcast this week. So like I said, we got to start thinking about this Angles podcast, if this is something that we're doing in 2026 or not, because we probably are just covering the same stuff over and over again. You can get the same stuff in less time by listening to fewer of these podcasts. But I know this is part of routine for some of you. So for now, this year, we're still around. Really quick before we move on, I want to shout out statrankings.com. We've been bringing them up every week. And obviously we have a partnership with them. If you go there, you click on the DFS tab, it'll point you back to 1 week season, but really tremendous site where, as I've been mentioning, a lot of the things that are behind the paywall on other stat sites are completely free on statrankings.com. So Stat Rankings started by Kevin Adams, who started DFS Guru Elite, started FTN, 2 really great sites. FTN also still a partner of ours. Kevin started Stat Rankings this year, and basically it was this understanding of like a lot of these stat heavy sites are pretty outdated in terms of how they deliver everything and what the experience is. And so we've got Stat Rankings where they're pulling in huge data sets, all this data and information, all these stats completely free. And so including a lot of advanced stats that are behind the paywall in most places. So check out statrankings.com. If you do your own research, you're always looking for stuff, in these matchups and whatnot, it's one of the best places that you can go. Okay, so let's talk about this Lamar setup. So Lamar, it's pretty interesting, right? Lamar has scored 26 plus in 10 of his last 20 games. That's the cutoff here because that's when Derrick Henry joined the team. That was the start of last year. So Lamar's played 20 regular season games that he finished since the start of last year. He scored 26 plus in 10 of those, in half of those games. So where have the stacks been? Well, everybody's going to be on Zay Flowers this week. Zay Flowers has only been part of the optimal way to play Lamar Jackson in 2 of those 10 games. So, or in 2 out of 20 games overall, right? So Zay Flowers shaping up as the highest or second highest owned player on the slate. Lamar Jackson's going to be popular. Easy buttons, right? Okay, you just play Lamar, you play Zay Flowers together. It's going to be a very popular stack. But Zay Flowers doesn't score touchdowns. He's not used in touchdown scoring range. And usually when Lamar's putting up his bigger games, it's because he's throwing for 3, 4, 5 touchdowns, right? He's not typically passing for 300 plus yards, but he's adding 3 or 4 or 5 passing touchdowns to his rushing output and ends up putting up these higher end games. Both times that Zay Flowers did hit alongside Lamar, there were other players who also hit. And one of them, it was 3 players hit. So it was like Lamar plus Zay Flowers plus 2 other guys. Another one, it was Lamar plus Derrick Henry plus Zay Flowers. And so again, it's not just Lamar plus Zay Flowers. It's like Lamar plus the Ravens offense is smashing. Therefore, you want additional guys to go along with Zay Flowers. So that's going to be one of the edges this week is that if this Ravens game plays out the way that it can, most people are going to be on Lamar plus Zay Flowers. Obviously, it can hit, but that's the lowest likelihood way for things to hit. What has been the highest likelihood way for things to hit since the start of last year? It is Lamar Jackson plus Mark Andrews plus Rashad Bateman. Why is that? Because when Rashad Bateman hits, it's because he's scoring 1 or 2 touchdowns. When Mark Andrews hits, it's because he's scoring 1 or 2 touchdowns. And when all of that comes together, Lamar is scoring his 3 or 4 or 5 passing touchdowns. So Lamar plus Andrews plus Bateman costs $14.5K in salary. Since the start of last year, they have games of 58.7, 66.3. So put this in context, you need about 58 points to stay on a 200-point pace. 58.7, 66.3, 69.5, 70.6, 71.4. To break that down more deeply, that is 25% of Ravens games since the start of last year. This stack has kept you on a 200-point pace. And in 15% of games since the start of last year, this stack has 29% of your salary, which is huge, right? Covering 29% of your salary on this pace. 15% of games has kept you on a 240-plus point pace. Now, if it misses hard. You're out of the money. You're not cashing. You're not doubling your money. But we're trying to win tournaments. In terms of what wins us tournaments with this stack, this is one of the clearest ways to go. There's some other ways to stack this up as well, which I'll hit on in the player grid. But wanted to shout that out here as we're talking about where we have some confidence and how this Ravens stack might stack up against the rest of the slate. Most people are going to play it really the wrong way according to the math, and very few people are going to play it the way that it's played out most often. Again, DraftKings is typically going to price players in such a way that they'll score roughly 4x their salary, roughly 20 to 25% of the time. So going back to the start of last year, this is a 3-player block that will be low owned that has gone for 4x its salary 25% of the time, and that has gone for almost 5x its salary 15% of the time. And again, people are not going to be on it. It'll look really obvious in retrospect if it ends up hitting. And obviously it'll wreck your roster if it misses, because Andrews and Bateman don't just miss, they miss hard because they get their points from these multi-touchdown games. And if they don't get the multi-touchdown games, then those scores are not there at all. But that's okay. We're fine playing things that way, especially on a week like this. The goal is not to cash. The goal is to get to first place. And this is one of the clearest pathways to doing that this week. Other things to touch on this week: state of the running back position. We've got high-priced guys who look really attractive this week. Jonathan Taylor, we talked about question marks on Bijan Robinson of like whether he can really get to the 35 or 40-point ceiling because maybe they run away with this game and Tyler Algier is taking some of these touches, but the matchup is there, the role is there. Bijan is a high confidence bet for 22, 24 plus points, and obviously can get up to 30, 35. I think Christian McCaffrey, who I'm not as high on against the Houston defense, because I don't see the ceiling, or I shouldn't say I don't see the ceiling. I see it being harder for him to reach the ceiling. He can put up 35. He can put up 40. Likeliest output for him here is, another 24 to 27 point game against this really tough Houston defense. But again, that's a solid score. I'm probably not going out of my way to pay his price tag for that, but I think he's very much in the mix with these other guys. He's not a bad play. He's just not for me this week. So we've got these 3 high price guys at the running back position. We've also got Saquon Barkley at 7,600, who we know we can say he's probably going to pop for a big game at some point. We've got Derrick Henry at only 6K, who we were paying 8K for him last year in literally this exact same offense. in a good matchup here against the Bears, in a spot where we expect the Ravens to score points. So kind of hard to stretch too far beyond those 5 running back options. I know other people like Rachaad White, DeAndre Swift is in the mix if you're playing around with this Bears and Ravens game. And then there's some other places that we go running back as well. But I think we got to really think about those top guys. Breece Hall's another one who's very much in the mix. But we got to think about those top guys at the running back position and recognize that the context of the slate is largely dictated by the presence of those guys and the matchups that those guys have. At wide receiver, we have one other high-price guy to think about in Jamar Chase. I know some people are on CeeDee Lamb against the Broncos and Emeka Egbuka, where the role hasn't quite matched the price tag. I know that people are hoping with all the injuries that it happens. He had 12 targets last week, but on 50 pass attempts. I don't expect 50 pass attempts against the Saints here. So something like 7 to 9, maybe 10 targets for Egbuka, which is fine at 7K, but just harder for him to post that tournament winner type of game. But again, we kind of look at wide receiver and it's like, yeah, you can make cases for these guys. Clearly, Jamar Chase is up here at the top. And Jamar Chase, to me, is in that same bucket as Jonathan Taylor, Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey, in that you have to be thinking about them and thinking about, do I want to try to get 2 of these guys onto a roster this week? And then outside of that, it's just full of question marks all the way down at the wide receiver position. And then stay to the tight end position. We have cheapies who are attractive. Dalton Schultz with the injuries to the Texans pass catchers. We have Cade Otton with the injuries to the Buccaneers pass catchers. We have Mason Taylor we're expecting Tyrod Taylor under center. After Tyrod Taylor came in last week, he threw 5 passes to Mason Taylor. It was kind of what we expected to happen last week, except Justin Fields can't throw the ball, so it didn't happen with Justin Fields on the field. But should be Tyrod Taylor under center again. We might not know till Sunday, but that should be the expectation. And he should be leaning on Mason Taylor, where they have no other real weapons here. The Bengals are already a tight end funnel. So at least 3 guys down here who are really attractive, just from like a one-off standpoint. And then if we're trying to save salary, right, then we think, hey, maybe we play 2 of these guys because, again, the ceiling on these guys is as high as the cheap wide receivers we can consider. The floor on these guys is higher, but then there's also opportunity cost to taking away one of these flex spots where we might want to play 3 running backs this week. So not necessarily giving you the answers there, but just presenting you with the questions that we have to be thinking about on this particular week. If you're just getting into building as you're listening to this, these are going to be some of the things that you're going to run into, and some of the decision points that you have to make is, do I want to take a cheap wide receiver to make all this work, where the ceiling is still high, but the floor is really low? Or do I want to take a cheap tight end where the ceiling is high as these cheap wide receivers? The floor is higher, but now I'm taking away a spot that I could use on an extra running back. And so, a lot of interesting things to think about on this particular week. That gives us a good feel for how I'm seeing this slate from a macro perspective, the angles of this particular slate, and what we have to be thinking about in terms of what are our pathways to first place this week? What are the things that we want to be thinking about doing in order to maximize our chances of maximizing our ROI on this particular week? And so, that's sort of the top-down view of what I'm seeing, how I want to be thinking through things, and the decision points that we're going to be presented with, along with some of the finer details of how we might handle some of those decision points. With that, we are going to wrap this up with the bottom-up build. If you're new here, if you're unfamiliar with the bottom-up build, we build thanks for making it to the end of the video podcast, whatever. But we build a roster with a 44K salary cap. Really cool thought exercise. We'll have a bottom-up build contest that you can enter. It's absolutely free. You can find the link for that in Discord in the BUB Challenge channel. You can also find the link for that at the top of my player grid outside the paywall. So even if you're not a subscriber, if you want to join the bottom-up build contest, again, free to enter, $100 prize to first place. Also, if you want, you can do free Bink Machine access, free Inner Circle access if you prefer that over the $100 prize. Free to enter, build with 44K salary cap. And like I said, you can find the link on the site in Discord. My bottom-up build this week, as you might have guessed, I wanted to go with Lamar Jackson, Rashad Bateman, and Mark Andrews, but I also went ahead and just said, what's one of the clearest ways to win on this particular week? Well, where do we have the highest confidence? One of the places I have the highest confidence is the Ravens scoring points here and the Bears keeping pace. Again, doesn't mean it's definitely going to happen, but in terms of what's likely to happen, what would happen the most times if we played out the slate 100 times, I like this as the highest confidence spot on the slate by quite a wide margin, because again, the other high confidence spots still leave us with question marks in terms of how that shakes out for fantasy production and whether or not we even get tournament winners. If the Ravens are having the big game here, we're getting tournament winners, there's still a question of how do we piece these together, right? Because there have been 10 of these games where Lamar scored 26 plus, and there's been a lot of different ways to stack them up. I'll lay those out in the player grid. I laid those out in the journal as well this week. If you're an Inner Circle member, you caught that already. But we do feel confident that there will be points here, or at least I do. And so attacking things in that way, what I wanted to do was actually go all in and do the full-on stack. So not just Lamar Jackson, Rashad Bateman, Mark Andrews, but also throw Derrick Henry in there. So that has hit in the last year. Lamar Jackson plus Derrick Henry plus both of these pass catchers. In a game like that, you probably need the Bears scoring a lot of points. You need the Ravens to be pushed throughout the game. So then we get to bet on, okay, the Ravens defense continues to play poorly, even coming out of the bye. The Bears play well on offense and continue to improve. So we throw DeAndre Swift and Rome Odunze onto this roster, giving us 6 pieces from this game. Obviously, that dictates what the rest of our roster is going to look like. And on top of that, we're dealing with a 44K salary cap, so it really dictates what the rest of our roster is going to look like. We're not going to be able to fit another running back onto here, so we're going to throw Dalton Schultz into the flex in order to save some salary. And that gives us an option of paying down for a really cheap defense and getting up into one of these 5K wide receivers, or taking one of these higher confidence defense and then paying down at wide receiver. So it's been kind of a ridiculous hot streak this year with defense special teams. I've had, I think, 1 week where my defense kind of cratered my rosters, and all like the 15 to 20 pointers, I've been on them. And a lot of that's just been betting on the defense playing against Tennessee, or betting on really good aggressive defenses against other mistake-prone quarterbacks. So I'm going to go ahead and throw the Colts in here and hope that we can get another 15 to 20-point game. And then I'm going to throw in Marvin Mims on this roster because we get another guy who can put up 15 to 20. So rather than going down to the Jets or the Bengals and saving some salary and then getting up to one of these 5K wide receivers who, we're hoping has a better shot at 20 points, but, still probably not getting 30. Instead, I'm going to take Marvin Mims, who fewer pathways to that 20-point game, but we know he can do it. And then we're hoping that the Colts defense can score 15 to 20, hoping Marvin Mims can score 15 to 20, and we get higher total points from this pairing to the ceiling than we could from the other way around. So again, the final roster here is, let's focus on the Ravens and Bears. We got Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Rashad Bateman, and Mark Andrews on the Ravens side. We've got DeAndre Swift and Rome Odunze on the Bears side. We're not trying to figure out matchups. We're not trying to figure out anything like that. We're just saying, lots of points get scored here. Let's pile in a bunch of players in this game and hope that we get the touchdowns in terms of how they shake out. Rounding out this roster with Dalton Schultz, Marvin Mims, and the Colts defense, spending 43.7K in salary with 6.3K left over. Again, you can kind of take that frame, that skeleton, and sort of mix around some pieces, bump up the salary, see what that brings you on a roster like this. If you like kind of the starting point on this roster, or some of the pieces on this roster, you could do that as well. Do the same thing with your rosters, build for 44K, and then see, hey man, I actually like this roster, and I've got 6K left over to add on to the spots where I'm least confident, however you want to do that. And then join the bottom up build contest, compete against us for first place, 44K salary cap. With that, I am going to get out of here, potentially redundant show, covering stuff that we're covering in other places, but hopefully covering some new things as well, new angles, new thoughts, new ideas, hopefully some things that spark something on your end in terms of how you can attack this slate. So I'm going to get out of here. I will see you on OWS, on my player grid, on all the other content in the scroll, where I encourage you to lean on those guys as well this week. And I will see you at the top of the leaderboards on Sunday.